It's 7:30 in the evening across India. I am Tanvi Taneja, live from New Delhi. You're watching DD India Global. We'll bring you the day's big stories from across India and the world. With me today from Washington, D.C. is my colleague, Nick Harper. Hi, Nick.
Good morning, Tanvi. It's 9 a.m. here in Washington, D.C., 3 in the afternoon across Central Europe. Coming up in the next 30 minutes, we get the latest from London on the British-UK cabinet reshuffle, and San Francisco gets ready for the Biden-Xi meeting at the APEC summit. But first, the headlines.
UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak reshuffles his cabinet, appoints former Prime Minister David Cameron as Foreign Minister. James Cleverly replaces Suella Braverman as Home Secretary. Environment Minister Therese Coffey also resigns.
As the Home Secretary, I'm absolutely committed to stopping the boats, as we promised, but also making sure that everybody in the UK feels safe and secure.
India's Commerce Minister visits San Francisco to take part in the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation and Indo-Pacific Economic Framework meetings in the US. And Israeli forces intensify their military operations in Gaza. European Union's Joseph Borrell calls for immediate humanitarian pauses in the conflict. First news about UK politics. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has sacked Home Secretary Suella Braverman after a series of controversies. Braverman's removal comes days after she defied Sunak by publishing an article attacking the Metropolitan Police's handling of pro-Palestinian marches. Downing Street said it had not signed off on the article, and she had previously been criticised for the language used on the issues around migration and homelessness. It's part of a wider reshuffle of Rishi Sunak's cabinet, which sees James Cleverly become the new Home Secretary.
Well, it's been a huge privilege to serve as Foreign Secretary, and in that time I worked very closely with my colleagues in the Home Office, cracking down on illegal migration, reducing the number of small boat arrivals, and now as the Home Secretary I'm absolutely committed to stopping the boats, as we promised, but also making sure that everybody in the UK feels safe and secure.
Now, in a surprise move, former British Prime Minister David Cameron has been named as the country's new Foreign Minister. Cameron, 57, served as British Prime Minister from 2010 to 2016, resigning after the outcome of the Brexit referendum when Britain voted to leave the European Union. His unexpected return to the front line of British politics comes after he spent the last 7 years writing his memoirs and involving himself in business. Sunak's office said that King Charles had approved giving Cameron a seat in Britain's upper chamber, allowing him to return to government as a minister despite no longer being an elected member of Parliament. Further, British Environment Secretary Therese Coffey resigned on Monday as Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is reshuffling his top team of ministers. Coffey has held several ministerial jobs, including that of a health minister and work and pensions minister, and also served as Deputy Prime Minister under former Prime Minister Liz Truss. Now, DD India's Stuart Smith joins us live from London on this story. Stuart, British Environment Minister Therese Coffey has also quit. Can we expect more surprises as the day goes by?
Well, there are ministers right now in 10 Downing Street speaking to Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, to discuss their fate, some losing their jobs, some being promoted, some being told that they're staying where they are. But also sometimes these ministers going in to tell the Prime Minister they would like to resign. That's happened at least twice, with 2 Conservative ministers saying to the Prime Minister that they need now to focus on their constituency, which is something we could expect more of, with many of these MPs previously in very safe seats now facing the prospect of a strong opposition Labour Party, which is 20 percentage points ahead in the polls. But when it comes to the Environment Minister, her leaving the government was very amicable. She said that it has been a privilege to serve in your cabinet. I look forward to supporting you from the back benches, meaning when she's not in the cabinet. Rishi Sunak accepted that resignation, said he appreciated her years of dedicated ministerial service. And so this was all very amicable after 10 years pretty much of Theresa Coffey in government under 5 British Conservative Prime Ministers. That's a very different story to Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, who we expect in her resignation letter, when it's published, will be incredibly critical of the Prime Minister.
Now, David Cameron is making his political comeback. Could Cameron's return as Foreign Minister cause fissures within the Conservative Party and weaken Sunak's position within the party?
Yeah, he's got a lot going for him by virtue of the fact, first of all, he's a very experienced politician with more years as Prime Minister than Rishi Sunak has at the moment. But there is a danger in exactly that as well, that Rishi Sunak, as someone that's already being perceived by the opposition, certainly, and amongst some MPs within his own party, as a weak leader, might become in the shadow of the former Prime Minister David Cameron. And there are many reasons that people within the Conservative Party are unhappy about him being appointed. For example, he was the one that proposed the Brexit referendum, but he fought for the Remain side and he resigned when Remain lost. So he's seen as someone that is not supportive of Brexit in principle. He's also seen as someone that has interest in closer ties with China, which again, many in Rishi Sunak's party do not want to see more of. And as Foreign Secretary, he would have the breadth to deal with those kind of issues. Another thing that is concerning some MPs is the fact that David Cameron is going in as Lord Cameron. He will be in the House of Lords, which means MPs will not be able to scrutinise him, to ask him questions of foreign policy. That will be up to the opposition in the House of Lords. So you're hearing some MPs saying this is an unelected Prime Minister appointing an unelected Foreign Secretary.
Stuart, has there been any official reaction by the opposition Labour Party yet on this reshuffle?
Yeah, well, the opposition Labour Party is saying that all of this chaos is because of 13 years of Conservative government without any ideas left and desperate to try and find some solution to make them more popular for the election. That's the line Labour is throwing out, for example, saying that it's a sign of weakness in Rishi Sunak that he had to call on a Prime Minister from 7 years ago in order to get him out of a problem where it's perceived by Labour Party opposition members that there was no one in his party, none of the other 350 lawmakers could be selected to be Foreign Secretary. He had to go and ask a previous Prime Minister. And of course, the only reason David Cameron has to be brought in as Foreign Secretary is because the old Foreign Secretary is replacing Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, who is someone that the opposition also has been incredibly critical of. They say Rishi Sunak should have got rid of her far sooner when she made all sorts of other comments counter to what the government's messaging was and counter to Rishi Sunak's policy. So they say this is the last gulp of a drowning government, in effect. One quote from one minister. So not a good sign, and certainly one that Labour can use to their advantage to portray the continuation of a government in turmoil and on its way out.
Thank you very much, Stuart Smith, for those updates. Now, India's Defence Minister Rajnath Singh held a telephonic conversation with UK Secretary of State for Defence Grant Shapps on Monday. Both ministers discussed a range of defence and security issues with particular emphasis on the Indo-Pacific. They briefly reviewed the ongoing engagements and discussed possible cooperation in new domains. Minister Shapps also invited the Indian Defence Minister to visit the UK in the near future. On to the United States now. San Francisco is hosting the annual Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation APEC Summit with the theme, Creating a Resilient and Sustainable Future for All. But what actually is going to make headlines is a face-to-face meeting between President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping on the sidelines. My colleague Nick Harper is in Washington, D.C. He gives us more on this and other stories making headlines around the world. Nick, it's over to you now.
Thanks, Tanvi. The stage is set in San Francisco for the biggest international event the city has hosted since 1945. Leaders from across the Asia-Pacific are flying in for the APEC summit that President Joe Biden will be hosting this week. DD India's Simon Marks is at the summit site in San Francisco and sent this report.
India's Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal will represent Prime Minister Narendra Modi at this year's APEC summit here in San Francisco, the first APEC summit to be held on American soil since 2011. The agenda is absolutely vast, and over the course of the last few hours here in San Francisco, fresh pressure has been applied on both President Biden, the host of the summit, and Chinese President Xi Jinping ahead of their meeting face-to-face on the sidelines of this event on Wednesday. It took fully a year for Washington and Beijing to negotiate even the possibility of a face-to-face meeting between the two men. So tense has the bilateral relationship between Washington and Beijing been, especially in the months since the United States shot down that Chinese surveillance balloon flying in American airspace. On Wednesday, it comes at a time, of course, when President Biden will be traveling to this APEC summit to reinforce the notion that the United States sees itself as a Pacific power and is absolutely determined to deepen its partnership with its partners across the Indo-Pacific in a bid to try and counter China's expansionist tendencies. Other issues where there may be difficulties making headway include the crisis underway in the Gaza Strip. There is disagreement among many of the countries attending this APEC summit over precisely who is to blame for the intensifying crisis in the Middle East. Many of APEC's 21 member states want the United States to liberalize its approach to trade, to allow market access, even perhaps to agree to begin the negotiation of free trade agreements. The Biden administration does not appear to be coming to this summit with that kind of an approach in mind. 78 years ago has San Francisco seen an international gathering like this. The city has cleaned up in the immediate vicinity around the Moscone Center where this summit is being held. Big stakes here, a big event, and of course enormous outcomes banking on it that will come out of this conference for nations throughout the Indo-Pacific. Simon Marks for DD India at the APEC summit in San Francisco.
India's Commerce and Industry Minister Piyush Goyal will attend the APEC Economic Leaders Summit in San Francisco. India has been invited to the 30th APEC Economic Leaders meeting as a guest economy. He'll also attend the ministerial meeting of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, or IPEF, in San Francisco that's taking place later today. During his 4-day visit to the US, Goyal will interact with industry leaders, prominent academics and US officials to further strengthen economic and commercial ties between the two countries. Goyal will also hold bilateral meetings with US Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo, US Trade Representative Catherine Tai, and ministers of other IPEF partner countries on the sidelines of the meeting. US Senator Tim Scott has suspended his run for the 2024 Republican presidential election nomination. Scott backed out about 2 months before the start of voting in the Iowa caucuses. Scott is the second major candidate to leave the race since the end of October. The US continues to face the risk of a government shutdown at the end of this week, despite a new compromise plan by Speaker Mike Johnson. Congressional Democrats indicated that they were open to Johnson's plan. Some House Republicans are in favor as well of a Tuesday vote, whereas some House Republicans are already pushing back the proposal for a two-step stopgap bill. The bill is intended to pressure the House and the Senate to agree on spending bills for the 2024 fiscal year by the assigned dates. Donald Trump Jr. is all set to testify again in his father's civil fraud trial later today. He's been called by the defense to field questions about the former US president's family real estate business. Donald Trump is accused of inflating his company's net worth by as much as $2.2 billion to secure better financing. Donald Jr. has already been called as a witness by the Attorney General's office. His sister Ivanka Trump also testified, but not as a defendant. Israel is continuing its military operations in self-defense against Hamas, with the conflict now reaching day 38. A video released by the Israeli army showed ammunition and combat equipment found in multiple raids. Israel accused Hamas of operating an underground headquarters in tunnels beneath hospitals in Gaza. The Israeli army has charged the terrorist group with deliberately using patients as human shields. On October the 7th, Hamas launched a wave of attacks on Israel that killed 1,200 people. Meanwhile, EU foreign ministers have met in Brussels to discuss the situation in the Middle East and Ukraine. The European Union has condemned Hamas for using hospitals and civilians as shields in Gaza. They also urged Israel to show maximum restraint to protect civilians.
We condemn the use of Hamas as hospitals and people as human shields, and on the other hand we ask Israel for maximum restraint and targeting in order to avoid human casualties.
DD India's Alex Kadia brings us more from Brussels.
The European Union is trying to strike a difficult balance when it comes to violence in the Middle East. On the one hand, they stand by Israel's right to defend itself. On the other, they think Israel could do more to minimize civilian casualties in Gaza. Germany's Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock, recently back from the region, said she could feel how great the despair is in the Middle East, how much the people in Gaza are suffering, how much the people in the West Bank are suffering because they are mourning their loved ones, and how much the people in Israel are suffering as well. On Sunday, the EU's 27 member states condemned Hamas for using hospitals and civilians as human shields. They also urged Israel to show maximum restraint to protect civilians from its attack on Gaza, saying the EU is gravely concerned about the deepening humanitarian crisis in the Strip. The statement came as EU member states are increasingly shifting their position and putting more pressure on Israel to do more to avoid civilian casualties. French President Emmanuel Macron called for a ceasefire for the first time last week, while Belgium's Prime Minister called Israel's response disproportionate. Others, like Germany and Austria, remain reluctant to overtly criticize Israel. With all this focus on the Middle East, some EU officials are worried it could distract from the war on Europe's doorstep. Top EU diplomat Josep Borrell said the bloc should not forget about Ukraine. Lithuania's foreign minister said that losing focus could lead to a victory parade for Vladimir Putin. In short, the EU's foreign ministers have the daunting task of walking a diplomatic tightrope about the war in Gaza in the short term and planning an expensive long-term support for their Ukrainian neighbours. Alex Kadia in Brussels reporting for DD India.
Well, that's it from me here in Washington. Tanvi, back to you in the studio.
Thank you, Nick, for joining us. Nick Harper joining us from Washington, D.C. You're watching DD India Global. Still to come on the show. Nepal decides to ban Chinese social media app TikTok, alleging it's damaging social impact. And breaking records as the largest edition to date, the Dubai Air Show 2023 takes flight.
Welcome to Jaipur.
Welcome back. You're watching DD India. I am Tanvi Taneja. On to Asia now. South Korea's Defense Minister Shin Won-sik and his counterpart Lloyd Austin have revised a bilateral security agreement at the security talks in Seoul. The tailored deterrent strategy aims at countering North Korea's nuclear weapons and other arms. The revision was considered necessary as the existing strategy is not addressing rapid advancements in North Korea's missile programs.
Secretary Austin and I affirmed that we can never accept any nuclear attack by North Korea, and if North Korea uses nuclear weapons, the country will face immediate, overwhelming and decisive response from South Korea and the United States, which will lead to the end of the Kim Jong-un regime.
And our deterrence commitment to the ROK remains ironclad. That includes the full range of our nuclear, conventional, and missile defense capabilities.
Now, our correspondent Patrick Fox has sent us this report from Singapore.
Well, the US and South Korea are in the middle of talks in Seoul on the North Korean threat. And one of the things that the two sides have done is to upgrade the so-called tailored deterrent strategy, which is aimed at countering North Korea's nuclear weapons and other arms. It has been in place for 10 years now, but the two countries felt that it didn't adequately respond to the rapid developments that Pyongyang has been making with its nuclear and ballistic missiles program. So the idea now is to expand on that. What that means isn't clear, but the current strategy entails the deployment of strategic assets, including US nuclear forces. And US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin noted that recently it had deployed ballistic missile submarines as well as a B-52 to South Korea. And he also suggested that the tempo of those deployments could continue despite other major global crises taking place right now. It also comes after the Atlantic Council think tank recently issued a study warning that the advancements that both North Korea and China were making in their weapons capabilities meant that there was a dramatic increase in the risk that the US and South Korea's deterrent strategies could fail in the next decade.
Now, India and Russia Foreign Office consultations were held in New Delhi today. They were co-chaired by Foreign Secretary Vinay Quatra and Deputy Foreign Minister Andrei Rudenko of Russia. They held detailed discussions on bilateral issues, including political, trade, economic, energy, connectivity, defense and consular issues. They also shared perspectives on regional and global issues of mutual interest. And now let's take a look at what else is making news around the world. Nepal has decided to ban the Chinese short-form video app TikTok, citing its negative effects on social harmony. According to local media reports, the government has said that a large section of society criticized TikTok for encouraging hate speech. It is not yet known when the ban will be implemented. Los Angeles commuters are facing major traffic headache as a downtown stretch of Santa Monica Freeway remained closed after a weekend fire. Newsom proclaimed a state of emergency in Los Angeles County in order to expedite the repairs. Warnings for wind and rain are in force in Northern Ireland, Wales, northwest England and northeast Scotland as Storm Debbie sweeps across the United Kingdom. The Met Office alerts come as Debbie caused power cuts and travel disruption in some places. Argentina is facing a mega inflation with a surge of 140% and still rising. As Argentina prepares for the presidential election, the nation's net reserves of foreign currency are trading in the red. The annualized inflation has already breached 138% and is set to rise further with the monthly rise of around 10%. Now, Sri Lankan President Ranil Wickremesinghe presented the annual budget for 2024 in Parliament on Monday. Wickremesinghe called for upliftment of Sri Lanka and cast aside political differences for this purpose. The President said Sri Lanka's public debt as a percentage of the GDP is expected to be reduced from 128% in 2022 to 95% in 2032 under the debt restructuring supported by the International Monetary Fund.
We strive to rescue the country from hellish situations it was facing. Government employees showed dedication and hard work to salvage the nation. Our friends helped us out.
Now, recounting the economic crisis experienced by Sri Lanka last year, Wickremesinghe mentioned of the assistance given by India. Now, let's go to Dubai. The 18th edition of the Dubai Air Show, titled The Future of Aerospace Industry, begins at the Dubai World Central today. The largest 5-day event to date will host over 1,400 exhibitors from 95 countries. The event will feature over 180 commercial aircrafts, including Airbus A320 P2F, A321neo, A330neo, A400M Atlas, H225 helicopters and C295. The event will also feature the latest electrical vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, drones and the UAVs. It will also feature the UAE Space Agency's latest initiatives and advancements in sustainable aviation fuel and cleaner aviation technology. And from Dubai to New Delhi, India's capital is all set to host the 42nd edition of the International Trade Fair at the newly redeveloped Pragati Maidan complex. Women entrepreneurs from the SAARC countries will be a key focus of this year's trade fair. The 13-day mega event begins on November 14th. It will also witness participation from various Indian states. Quite an experience it is to visit the India International Trade Fair, and this time the buzz will be of the Bharat Mandapam. That's it in this edition of DD India Global. Join us tomorrow again at 5 p.m. and 7:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time. Connect with us on Facebook, X, formerly Twitter, and Instagram at DD India Live. We will be back with more news as it breaks air on DD India. I'm Tanvi Taneja from all of us here in New Delhi. Thanks for watching. Namaskar.